everyone a little back in history in terms of the evolution of social development. So if you really look at the history dating back from the time we got independent to where we are now, over these years, we began with a concept of, business. We began with a lot of industries coming up, industrialists setting up their establishments, and the government, on the other hand, having the approach towards social development, which over the years seemed a little inadequate. And there was a certain recognition of responsibility from large industrialists like the Tatas and the Birlas, who said that we must get into, doing some form of development in the areas that we're working in. And then began institutions like the NGOs, which said we are non-government organizations, beyond whatever the government is doing, and we are different from what the industrialists are doing, and we are a third kind of entity who are dedicated to the social cause. And that gave rise to, it was basically sprung with several activists, social activists who were working on particular causes. And thus began a certain journey towards the social development in the country. A large part of the work done by NGOs over the years, I would say, has been supported by donations coming from individual businessmen, the high net worth individuals, followed by, then certain institutions which chose to kind of support the work. Then we had an era, when all this was happening and we had like huge number of NGOs coming up, we had an era where the corporate social responsibility started coming into force, post 2010, 2013, 14, more like a law. While the private sector was working on it, then there was, the public sector was already working on it, then the private sector also came in through CSR. In the form of responsible actions in the community and society, and picking up good social causes. What we have been noticing while this was happening is, I would say, ever since 2010, there has been a new format of looking at social development, which was prevalent in the international markets, developed markets before, but it has been more relevant in our country since 2010, more, I would say, in the form of social enterprises. Yeah, social enterprises, bring in conceptually a certain convergence between a business outlook towards society and picking up a social cause and working entirely for it. It's a sort of a mix between the two, and it's a very interesting mix because a social enterprise has, I would say, a two-pronged agenda as against a not-for-profit, which has a one single agenda of purely social development on the cost they picked up. Whereas a social enterprise has two-pronged agenda. One is social development, creating and building the impact. On the other hand, they also have another dynamics to take care, which is the business aspect of generating profit that makes them sustainable and takes them on the path of growth from an investment standpoint. So this is a fundamental difference between an NGO and a social enterprise. Another important difference would be in the form of how you are registered as an entity. An NGO would be registered as a trust, a society, or a Section 8 company, whereas social enterprise would typically be registered as a private limited company that can seek investments in the entity, registered entity. So you would find another important difference beyond the two that I've told you. The third important difference between an NGO and a social enterprise is the entire approach to social development. The NGO approach to social development, as many of us would be familiar with, is one that is, a socialistic approach towards a society, a collaborative, community-based approach, etc., that is driven by donations, driven by donor engagement. On the other hand, a social enterprise approaches a problem from a business perspective, from a business enterprise perspective. So while they pick up the social cause, which is the same as an NGO would pick up, the solution and the solutioning approach and the design of the program would be completely different, which would be driven by a business motive of generating not just profit, but also at a second level, of generating return for investors. So fundamentally in the DNA, you will find that they are very, very different in everyone's mind who's in the social sector. So it's worth addressing from multiple perspectives, I would say. I think firstly, the question that one should ask is, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? So whether it's in education or healthcare or sanitation, environment, how large is the problem that I can take on? Each of these sectors really have huge problems in the country to be solved in terms of scale, right? And also in terms of depth, not just in terms of numbers, but also in terms of depth of intervention. One really needs to understand what's the scale and depth that I would like to operate as an enterprise. And once you've arrived at that, then you would be in a position to know how big is the challenge on hand, and therefore how many people I'm going to need in terms of putting this together. And when I say people, I don't mean the resources who will work for us, but in terms of stakeholders who will really make this happen. Do I need donors or do I need investors? That's the question one needs to really ask. In the long run, if I want to run this run, do I need people like partners to run along with me to make this happen? Or, donor kind of intervention is fine, and then we can make the rest of it happen. So that at a fundamental level can make a difference in your decision of which way you want to go, as one aspect. The second aspect is definitely the entrepreneurial mindset. There are no two ways about it, because people who come from a social background, who have studied, their MSWs, and they have been trained for it, and they have always thought from that perspective and have worked from that perspective, have a very different approach to the social problem. Whereas the ones who are an MBA and come from business background and want to do something for the society at a large scale, come from a different mindset of looking at the problem. So your mindset, I would say, would be a fundamental deciding factor of which route you want to take. Both of the routes are going to take you to the same end goal. So the route depends on your mindset that you are willing to take. That's, in my opinion, that's an important aspect. And I would say, therefore, sustainability that we speak about. I want to touch upon this a little more for two reasons. Sustainability is often spoken about, the sustainability of the community intervention in terms of an impact. But not many people really talk about sustainability of the organization itself to be able to sustain the problem intervention, to be able to sustain the development intervention. When we look at inward sustainability, you really have to focus on the financial sustenance of an organization. A donor-driven organization has a different method to financial sustenance, and a profit-oriented organization has a different method to sustenance. And the last couple of years of COVID have truly taught a lot of not-for-profit organizations that what we were doing all this while in so many years, what got us here won't get us there in future. Because for the first time, many, many NGOs, which were well oiled by donations from even corporate organizations, why only individuals, suffered in the 2-year span of COVID. And that's when a realization came, and I'm glad it came, because we've been advocating self-sustenance for very long, and not many organizations really thought it was important. And in some ways, this came as a learning from COVID. And thanks to that, because people realize that when donations dry up, the best of individuals who are donating to you, the best of organizations that were oiling your work, well-intended corporates who were supporting you could not support for various reasons. And when that happens, you realize the dependence as an institution that you have on others. You are, one, not able to take care of the developmental work, and your responsibility to the community is jeopardized, and you feel bad that you're letting down people because someone else is letting you down. And that value chain is something that really was painful during COVID. Number two, several development organizations also realized that they could not sustain keeping their good people in the organization because they were not able to pay them, right? Simply because they had not built a corpus that could sustain their fixed costs and so on and so forth. So all of these learnings, lead us to a very big question as to how do we want to build self-reliance financially in the organization. So as Sociocatalysts, we've been, advocating an important element here, whether you're a trust or whether you're a social enterprise, either ways. You have to have the financial strength to stand on your feet. And it can come from the programmatic work that you do. Even as an NGO, it can come from the programmatic work that you do. And there are various models that we can work. Let's take a couple of examples. You look at, organizations who have done it exceedingly well. Let's say Shankara Eye Foundation, which works on providing free cataract surgeries to poor people, needlessly blind people. They do lakhs and lakhs of free cataract surgeries annually. And they do it in the most self-sufficient manner, which means that even if they did not have donations, they would still be able to do their programmatic interventions and still be take care of themselves. They have built a model of self-sustenance, which is absolutely justifiable. And there is absolutely no guilt in the entire enterprise or in the entire institution or the NGO in doing it, because you are at level 1 of self-sustenance. A social enterprise goes to a second level, saying that not only am I self-sufficient financially, I'm also in a position to provide returns to investors who partner with me, while taking them along this journey. So that's the second level of financial sufficiency. So depending on you as an individual, at what level you would like to operate in making the social change. When I say level, these are levels of financial self-sufficiency and sustenance. At what level you would like to operate is again an important determinant of which route you should take in terms of being an NGO or a social enterprise. So I think these would be some of my immediate thoughts around the question.